Hey guys, welcome to Goodwill Dynamics. Today it's just me and Adam, and we're going to be discussing a proverb from the book of Proverbs. Um, it's one that is very rich in meaning, directly references the idea of goodwill, and I think there's really a lot there for us to delve into, conceptually, philosophically, as well as practically. So, without further ado, I guess, Adam, we'll have you read that proverb, which is brief, and then we'll discuss it. Get right into our talk.
All right, thanks, Nick. This is from Proverbs 11:27 through 29. It's titled "The Voice." Those who seek good find the goodwill of others, but those who look for evil are sure to find it. Those who trust in their wealth are headed for great disappointment, but those who do right will sprout like green leaves in the spring. A person who stirs up trouble in his family will inherit stormy winds, and foolish troublers will end up serving the wise.
Should we leave that up just a little bit there?
Sure.
It's pretty deep stuff, so I think it'd be good if people could take it in.
Yeah.
But it's yeah. Well, what do you make of that?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. You got three verses that solidly point towards the idea of goodwill.
Yeah.
But in clearly different ways. And there's obviously there's a lot of it calls to mind other scriptural passages. So yeah, I mean the first one we see this a lot in the world today, right? There's a principle in the universe that seems to go something like you find what you're looking for. You put attention on something, and that you'll find it. Doesn't mean it's necessarily truth, but it's the truth that we want or that we're searching for, right? And so we just try and validate that.
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. So those who seek to find the goodwill of others. Those who seek good find the goodwill of others. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if social media spent more time? If we as users of media and I think the larger media resources that we have, if we spent more time looking for the good, we might mellow the mood in the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you do find what you're looking for, right? I mean, it's what you focus on day in and day out is kind of what, not only what comes into your life, but it's sort of, it's literally kind of structuring your brain when you put attention on positive or negative things, right? You're like, you're focusing on that. You're kind of, your brain's kind of looking for food for that particular, whatever sort of activity you're doing. You're looking for the stuff that's going to give you the right nutrients, as it were, for that, right? So if you're doing negative thinking, like, oh, let me find this negative stuff I can think about. Let me find, why the world stinks and everything's unfair. And likewise for positive stuff. And I think what's interesting is, obviously good and bad things happen all the time. You're not going to stop the fact that the world is sort of unpredictable. But I think, like, what I see this proverb as largely being about is holding fast within the sort of endless cycles of the world, the cyclical nature of the world, how everything kind of moves up and down, right? And I take it, from that middle part, that that second little bit there, those who trust in their wealth are headed for great disappointment. But those who do right will sprout like green leaves in the spring, right? It's like, well, wealth, it's sort of, it's that which passes away, right? It's limited, it's material, but those who do right will sprout like green leaves in the spring, right? So it's an allusion to the seasons, right? The sort of the cycle of the year, right? The cycle that the world is sort of literally revolving around. Doing right, focusing on the good, is the way, is the way to make sense of and move forward within a world that's constantly going up and down, that's constantly going through these highs and lows and these cycles, right? So instead of counting on, your wealth lasting forever and, having these, if you're, let's say you're born to this $1 million estate, and you just kind of always had it good, and you just kind of expect to always have it good, and just avoid problems whatever the cost. It's like, well, that's not attuning yourself to the way the world actually is, right? There's always going to be ups and downs, but you focus on the good, you focus on what you can do and how you can move forward. And that's sort of, that's back to the first part. That's back to like, seek good, you find good, you seek evil, you find evil. And so that, to me, that's what then makes sense of that last part. A person who stirs up trouble in his family will inherit stormy winds, right? And foolish troublers end up serving the wise. So the wise person sees, holds fast to the order that they can make out of the chaos, right? And understanding the big picture and focusing on the positive stuff, but the stormy winds are sort of just being in the midst of the chaos, right? Just letting it take you wherever it goes.
Yeah, those are great tie-ins to these ideas. I like the cyclical observation.
Let's let the people look at us. By the way, I think they've seen this.
They had enough of this.
They've looked at this long enough, I think.
Yeah, the wealth, and that's metaphorical, right? As much as anything. When I think of the focus on wealth, obviously the material world comes to mind, but really it's an inward focus. It's an individual or a solitary act. I'm focusing on what makes me okay in this moment. There's a bit of a scarcity mentality in that. Like, do I have enough that I can weather the storm? And there's nothing wrong with being prepared, right? We all should be prepared for those storms in life, and we should all have we should have toilet paper the next time a virus comes around. And there's nothing, I don't want to disparage the idea of being prepared, certainly, but it's an inward focus. And if our focus is not wealth in the abundant realm of things, where, okay, I have this is nice, how can I expand this? How can I give it to the world? How can I create more good? Because I really do believe the universe is abundant and it wants to give abundantly.
Yeah.
And our focus is going to either narrow those wonders, of life, or to a very, self-focused point of view, or it's going to manifest abundantly where everybody can share and participate. And I realize it's tricky to figure out how to best do that, but if it begins with our own focus. We talked a lot about focus with this proverb, and I think that's where we will ourselves to focus on the good and the abundant.
Yeah. Well, it's like you apply the same principle to, we talk about fostering goodwill, right? Ultimately, these thoughts should be leading to actions, you know, that which in some sense foster goodwill. And I think, you know, like when you're trying to get people together in the name of that, you're even that's going to be chaotic, right? And that's kind of like, in a sense, that almost strikes me as like the first problem to solve when you're trying to do good is like the fact that you want to get a bunch of people together to do good. You want to get people united, you know, behind the idea of good or doing good. But at the same time, you're going to be coming up against a lot of disagreements. You're going to be coming up against, you know, the vagaries of like how everyone's a little different. Everyone's from someplace different. Everybody's got different ideas about things. Um, and so that strikes me as another. It's another instance where, you know, you're in the chaotic sea, or you're in this sort of, you know, this churn of the seasons, like this cyclical material world that's a little chaotic. And maybe the first one of the primary things that, you know, the first things that you have to focus on with the idea of doing good, with the idea of spreading goodwill, is having that positive focus in the face of that, right? In the face of, but because you can't just say goodwill and expect everybody to agree with what you're saying, to know exactly what you're saying, to have the same idea of it, and to sort of just hearken to the call, right? You're going to have to deal with the vagaries. So having that focus on the positive, having that resilience of, you know what, I know there's going to be highs and lows, but I believe in this enough to sort of make a straight line through it all. You know, that's to me, that's kind of the key to it. And that's
Yeah.
maybe the first thing, you know, which I think it's not focused on enough often, you know, by people who are trying to do good. It's like, you know, you have to understand that getting people together to do good, creating more good in the world, is going to be a sort of itself a messy, difficult thing. And you have to have a certain amount of faith
Yeah.
to weather that.
Well, and just realize we have control over what we have control over, right? Instead of trying to control everything and everyone,
Yeah.
we can at least control our space and our sphere of influence and be present in the moment. So when you're on that, you know, that long subway ride and it's crowded and, you know, somebody's maybe blasting music or there's an argument going on or something, you can kind of go to that inner place and realize this is just a passing moment. You know, things will be okay. How can I look at these people differently instead of being annoyed? Because that just reinforces those emotions and those feelings and sets us up for future, um, you know, patterns where, okay, gosh, I got to take this ride again, or I got to do this thing where I know I'm going to be annoyed with this person. And I think if we try and put ourselves in a different state where, um, and look at individuals and circumstances and see it as, you know, kind of a motion picture that you're just experiencing, and how can I let those emotions be there? Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's kind of annoying, but it is going to pass, you know. And I know that this is you know, this is another human being, or this is a group of human beings that we're all just trying to get along as best we can. I think that puts us in a better state of mind, and it will create the kinds of chemical responses in our body that we want to sow on a regular basis. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it's like, you know, and this is maybe just a simpler, better way to say what I've been saying, is that you want there to be a bigger picture, right? You want to have an understanding that there's a bigger picture which is solid, which, you know, in some sense absorbs the current moment in all of its chaos, right? So like you said, like, you know, you're watching a movie, right? So there's a real world in which the movie is playing, right? But you're right now, you happen to be looking at the movie. But I think like our brains naturally try to do that, right? Like try to create a bigger context for what we're looking at that will sort of allow it to make sense or allow us to process and cope with it, right? So it's not just like, oh, this random terrible chaos is going on. And that's sort of the essence of I guess what I've been trying to say maybe. Um, it's sort of built into our natural tendency to cope with the world that we're trying to build a bigger picture of things, right? A solid big picture. And yeah, people focusing on that together is part of what brings goodwill, I think.
Yeah, I like what you were saying about the cyclical nature of um, of what goes on in life, where and if we can incorporate that into those moments of tension, realizing that there are, some short cycles, there's also some very long cycles, and they're full of a variety of different experiences and emotions, but it is fairly cyclical. And so what kinds of cycles can we create in our own sphere of influence that reinforce a will towards good, rather than just reinforce the negative that I think is just a natural tendency, because life is, at times very heavy. So creating cycles, I think that was a really good thought that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like, at a certain point, I don't know, it's you look for the center of the wheel, right? The wheel's always turning. So it's now, it's this part of the wheel's on top, it's winter. Now this part of the wheel's on top, it's spring. But it's like, at a certain point you experience these extremes in succession, and you're like, oh, well, this is clearly part of the same process, right? Like this is one object moving in some sense. So what's making it move? What's in the what's the center of the wheel? What's the force that's acting there? Like I mentioned, I happened to come upon this quote recently from J.R.R. Tolkien, where he talks about I'm not gonna get the exact quote, but he talks about how the resurrection embodies what he calls Christian joy, and that Christian joy is sort of it looks similar to sorrow because it comes from a place where joy and sorrow are one, right? And he ties that into the resurrection, to the death and rebirth of Christ. And I think that's so like that almost ties it up, right? It's or ties it together. It's that there's, you see death and all the sorrow and letting go of death followed by rebirth. There's no escaping that the two things are connected, right? When you experience that joy of rebirth, it's not, you can't fail to understand that it is what it is because of the death that preceded it. You know what I mean? So it's like that's kind of like that moment I'm talking about where you're like, oh, well, these two things are so different, and yet they're clearly part of the same thing, right? It's the same kind of wheel turning. So what's making it turn, right? And that's, that center of the wheel thing. I think that's where that point of stability is, where you can look out and say, okay, well, things are good sometimes, bad sometimes, but I'm in the middle here, and I can focus where I want to focus. I could focus on the good and the productive and what's right enough that I'm going to keep going in a straight line, through the ups and downs, basically.
Yeah, I mean that brings up a lot of really interesting thoughts. I like that idea, the joy and the sorrow being one in terms of cycles, right? In this case, Tolkien's talking about resurrection, but realizing that life, it brings to mind, let me just, there's a poem, I came across it years ago watching a show, and it just stuck out to me because it hit, it sort of encapsulated a lot of experiences that I'd had. And it's from a Shropshire lad, one of A.E. Houseman. It's a pretty long poem, but these two verses I really like. It says, "Into my heart, an air that kills, from yon far country blows. What are those blue remembered hills? What spires, what farms are those? That is the land of lost content. I see it shining plain, the happy highways where I went and cannot come again." So it's that idea of revisiting those moments of joy, but realizing you can't entirely recapture it. There's no way to live it again. But having, this sort of sweetness to that sentiment, you can live it out in your mind and your memory, but you'll never quite experience it the same way. It was what it was in that context, in that time and space. And so there is kind of that sorrowful joy. But the important part of that is realizing that we don't want to recapture all those moments. They will never be as sweet as they were in the instant. And so to always be moving forward. And so when we talk about cycles, it's more of a spiral, right? You want to keep moving onward and upward. You don't just want to keep spinning around and around. We never want to be stagnant. We always need to be moving forward. And so we let go of past joys and past experiences. And sometimes that's really easy to do if those are bad experiences, but sometimes it's difficult to move on from those. But always with the thought that it's getting better, and we're bringing more goodwill to the world as we move along.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I think it's about, those moments that happen, right? Those joyous moments, or even profound moments that, of sorrow or what have you. It's like when you're in that place where you can withstand the cycles and move forward with a focus on the positive, with the focus on your goal, on pursuing some kind of greater joy. I think when you're in that place, you'll experience more moments like that. You know what I mean? It's you don't, not to say you have to forget those moments, or but you also shouldn't cling to them like they're this is as good as it'll ever be. I mean, I think when you find that middle point, when you find that point where you're kind of in the cycle but not of the cycle, right? When you sort of like then you can experience that every day, perhaps.
There's always more opportunity. Settling on past experiences, we should believe that there's more and there's better, and there's larger contexts in which to experience these things. And I think that's one of those thoughts that can come to us when we're or that we can try and keep present in mind when we're being present in the moment of life, is to always have that forward, have expectation, have be driven towards good things, never settle too much.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much more I could say. Perhaps we'll have a longer conversation on this topic at some point, or something similar. But do you think, I don't know, should we leave it about there?
Yeah, that's a good ending point, I think.
Right. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little discussion of ours. We may try a few things like this in the future, but please, as always, like, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and stay tuned. We'll be producing more videos for you before you know it, probably in a couple days, maybe in a week's time. But we will be seeing you soon. And you know, keep looking for that center of the wheel. Is all I can tell you. And keep operating in the spirit of goodwill. We'll check you out next time.